Hello, welcome to my home. I'm Dr. Nick Begich, and today's video that we're producing is HAARP and beyond. It's been a long time since we've produced a video on HAARP and really brought out the information in the context of where we are now in 2006 versus where we were when we first disclosed this story in the book Angels Don't Play This HAARP back in 1995. So today's topic will deal with the various aspects of HAARP and talk about what's happened since with some of the key players involved in that research, as well as the political implications and where this technology is going from here. This may be the first time that you've seen a video or gotten familiar with any of our work, so I want to give you a little bit of background on me. I'm Dr. Nick Begich. I have a doctorate in traditional and complementary medicines. I come from a political family here in Alaska, second generation of political involvement here. I also have a background in education, being twice elected president of the Alaska Federation of Teachers and the Anchorage Council of Education. I've written 3 books, co-authored with James Roderick and Gene Manning. And am presently the executive director of the Lay Foundation on Technologies, which is involved in researching and educating the public on technology issues. And currently it's providing us a great deal of the research base necessary to produce this video and much of our work into the future. Welcome to my library. I want to start with a little discussion of the Lay Institute on Technology, Inc., which was set up as a Texas nonprofit corporation primarily to educate the public on the impacts of technology. And as a result of that effort and my work with Dorothy Lay, the founder of that foundation, we're able to continue to archive and develop material that's useful for research projects like this and many others. In fact, all that material now is posted on the internet at www.layinstitute.org. And if you go there and you look at the site, there's an area called EPI Search, and that is our research index. And so if you go there, you can search any keyword. You can look up HAARP or climate change or radio or microwave or any of the words that are of interest to you, and you'll see every document that we've stored there on those archives available to the public in a way that makes it more useful in researching these issues. So take a look at that. It's useful in conjunction with this production today. But let's get back to the HAARP issue and where that issue began for me. HAARP started really with a very short segment, a little article actually in a magazine called Nexus, an Australian journal. I read the article, and it was about a project taking place here in Alaska called HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project. And at that time, it was being operated by the U.S. Navy and Air Force in developing what they called a developmental prototype for weapons applications of a very, very large radio frequency array or field of antennas located here in Alaska. And so, what happened when I read that article is I looked at it and I thought, Alaska is a big place geographically, but when you think about it politically, it's very small. We have a small population. You tend to hear about what's going on, and virtually nothing had been reported in our local media regarding this project. And I'm kind of a curious person, and the article was pretty outrageous in what it was claiming. So I went and looked at what was available first by searching the sources that were cited in that article at our local library, LUSAC, which happens to be one of 78 libraries at that time in the country that were designated as federal repositories, places where any unclassified federal record are either stored or they have to produce it for you for free. So it's an incredible research library here in Anchorage, and as I said, 78 of them around the United States. As a result, we were able to verify all of the sources in that article. That got me pretty concerned. And I went next to talk to Trustees for Alaska, which is one of the larger sort of umbrella environmental groups in Alaska. And my thought was, you know, with the implications of this system, this group certainly had to be following the issue. And surprisingly, they weren't. In fact, they said the Audubon Society was looking at it. So I went over to the Audubon Society in Anchorage and talked to them. They had a very short file on the HARP project, and basically what they were concerned about was the few hundred of acres of wetlands that were going to be disturbed, and they were concerned about the flyway, where birds, migratory birds, were coming across that particular region. But those were their only concerns. There were much, much bigger implications to HARP. Discovering that virtually nobody was following the issue, it seemed like a very, very important issue to me. And so what I did is I sent a large amount of material, including the technical specifications for the array, to a friend of mine, a physicist who had the background to take a look at whether or not the claims on this facility were actually real and whether it really was a threat. The conclusion that he and others made was that it was a very significant issue, one that needed some public attention, and they insisted that I write an article about the subject. And so that began, for me, a journey that's now lasted 11 years in dealing with this issue and those things that came out of it. But let's talk about what HARP can do. As I said, it's an array, a field of antennas. And what it essentially started as was 48. 6 in one direction, 8 in another direction, and these are 72 feet tall with a cross dipole. So they're a column going up and then a cross dipole going like so. And by firing these antennae in a very specific order, you can focus the radio frequency energy, concentrate it to a relatively small area, up in an area above the Earth's surface called the ionosphere. And let me explain sort of where the ionosphere is. You've got to look about 30 miles above the Earth's surface for the very beginnings of the ionosphere, and then it stretches out perhaps as far as 400 kilometers out into space and even further in the upper reaches of the ionosphere. And it acts as an electrical shield, if you will, an energized area of our environment so that cosmic radiations coming in from the sun and from space hit this layer, and it acts as a filter, filtering out particle streams that would make a life on planet Earth impossible without this. Now, people talk about ozone depletion as a major issue, and it certainly is, and we'll cover that in another video in this series. But let's talk about a hole in the ionosphere, which would be significantly greater than any problem attributed to ozone depletion by comparison. Because of the kinds of radiation, it wouldn't be just ultraviolet radiation, as is the case with ozone. This would be very, very dangerous particle streams that would literally alter the genetic blueprint of the planet. So this is the area that the military is targeting as their research area in the developments of HARP. And HARP was originally invented by a guy named Dr. Bernard Eastland, and it was an original concept that he had, and he had had this idea that you could create a shielding effect. And let me talk a little bit about what kind of effect that might be. When you look at the ionosphere as this layer around the Earth, and then if you think of the Earth as also kind of a giant motor that's spinning around, and with that comes magnetic field lines. And these field lines go from the southern part of the poles all the way up, and they wrap around, they come back in at the northern polar regions. And in these polar regions, where those magnetic field lines interact with the atmosphere and oxygen and nitrogen, you get the aurora borealis, or the northern lights. Or in the southern hemisphere, you get the equivalent of our northern lights, and it's where this energy is interacting with the atmosphere. Well, by using these naturally occurring field lines, you can actually manipulate energy coming off the ground, coming off of a field of antennas like what HARP has in Gokana, Alaska, which is just 250 miles northeast of Anchorage. This facility that was built in the early 1990s has been advanced significantly. It started with 48 antennae. They now have 180 in the array, eventually 360. The idea is, again, to focus that energy. By firing this in a sequence, this array, you can create what's called cyclotron resonance, which would be visually seen as sort of a corkscrewing motion of the energy as it rolls up into the ionosphere, getting more and more concentrated as it goes. Just the opposite of the way radio frequency energy generally works when it comes off of a broadcast antenna where we hear radio programs today. What happens in that case is the energy starts out concentrated, spreads out very, very rapidly in the same way that light from a flashlight spreads out very rapidly. They follow the same basic principles in physics. But as with light, it can be concentrated in the form of a laser where that light is concentrated and very, very powerful at far distances. The same is true by analogy with radio frequency energy and the HARP array. That's what makes it so much different than anything else on the planet.